Welcome to the Moon Magic Tarot channel and welcome to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining me. In this video, you are going to learn how to use an Astro-Moon diary or journal, or it could be an astrology journal or diary, it could be a moon journal or diary. The principles that I'm going to teach you today apply to any of these books. These books are actually tools. They give you information, and the differences within them are simply the amount of information they give you and the way the information is presented. So by the end of this video, you will learn not only how to use that information to your absolute greatest advantage, but you will also have enough information to be able to go out and find exactly the right book for you. You'll know what you're looking for and you'll know what will resonate with you. So let me fill you in on the things that we are going to talk about in this webinar. So the very first thing I'm going to do is talk to you about some amazing science. Now, my reason for doing this is because when we learn something, if we actually understand kind of why we're learning something or how it all actually works, it honestly makes so much more sense. And it's a bit like a mathematical formula. If you're given a mathematical formula, it just looks like a bunch of numbers and a bunch of figures. But when you can apply that formula to something in your everyday real life, and you can see how it's applied, what its application is, it all starts to make much more sense. So I'm going to dive into very briefly some amazing science so that you can connect to these different pieces of what is actually an extraordinary jigsaw of knowledge, because I think then we really get it. We understand how these tools can work for us and why we're learning about these different components. Then we're actually going to get completely hands-on. I'm going to get out some diary pages, some journal pages, and we will literally step by step look at the way information is presented, what it all means and how to use it. So let's dive straight into some incredible science. So let's talk about the science of energy. If you look through the most powerful microscope in the world and you look at, say, I don't know, a bit of you, your arm, your hand, you'll see your skin, you'll see your cells, you'll get down to atoms, and eventually you will see pure energy. Everything is made of energy, resonating at different frequencies, interacting in relationship, bouncing off each other. Everything is all made of the same stuff. And this is where science and spirituality meet, because the wisdom traditions of the world have always taught that we are all one and the same. Tribal traditions teach that everything is actually living, it's alive, it's resonating. And so when we get into the science of energy, we begin to look at things very differently, because we can see that we are an integral part of the whole, and that we ourselves as energy are responding to the energy of stuff that's going on around us, and likewise the stuff that's going on around us, the energy around us, is responding to us. There's an interaction, and this has been shown in countless experiments. Now, what I want to do now is just give you a very real, or some actually very real, tangible examples of how we can engage with energy, or kind of get our head around it, basically. Now, if you were to walk into a room and a couple of people were in there and they'd had a blazing row, if you have any degree of sensitivity, you're going to walk into that room and you're going to think, wow, I can cut the atmosphere with a knife. What's going on here? What's gone on between these two people? This is energy. You can't see it. It's not visible to you, but it's tangible. It's a real experience, and it actually has an impact, a massive impact. Anyone that walks into that room is going to experience the impact of the energy that those two people have created. And something I want to add to that is whether they are aware of it or not. We all have different levels of sensitivity. We're all completely unique human beings walking our pathway through this lifetime. If you are a very, very sensitive person, you will walk in and out of situations, and some people are so sensitive, they are literally absorbent like a sponge. They pick up on absolutely everything. Other people will walk in and out of situations and not feel anything. It doesn't mean that it's not there. It doesn't mean it's not a real experience just because one person is aware of it and the other person isn't. It just means there's a different level of sensitivity that connects to conscious awareness. Let me give you another example of energy. If someone says something to you like sorry, but they don't mean it, then even though on paper, so to speak, if you wrote down sorry, it sounds okay, it all looks good, you will feel the intent. Now, there have been some extraordinary experiments that show that words, thoughts, language, and emotions all carry an energetic resonance. They alter the energetic frequency of the energy exchange, let's say, that's taking place. So in the same way that somebody could actually say something to you in a jokey way, and it could be dismissed as a jokey thing, and it might all sound okay or look good if you were to write it on a piece of paper. That sentence, that statement is made. But if the intent was designed to make you feel uncomfortable, you will receive the discomfort. There's a lot of bullying that goes on in that way, in a very underhanded way, which stops the person on the end of the bullying. It stops them from being able to justifiably defend themselves. So words, language, emotions carry an energetic resonance, and this resonance has an impact. We can feel it, but you can't see it. So it's a tangible, real experience. And this leads me very nicely onto some absolutely amazing science that actually visibly demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. In 1999, a Japanese scientist called Masaru Emoto did an extraordinary set of experiments. He took water and he exposed the water to various influences, to thoughts, to language, to words, to emotions, to music. And he then froze the water and he looked at the crystalline structures that were formed when he froze that water. And he found that water is immediately responsive to the environment around it. It is constantly responding to the energetic exchange of the language, the words, the emotions, the resonance, the energetic resonance, the incoming resonance, let's say. And what was utterly mind-blowing, and it really, really is. If you haven't seen these experiments, Google them and look them up. They are just incredible, the photographs. When he exposed water to language like love, peace, harmony, the water crystals that froze were stunningly beautiful, absolutely amazing. When he exposed water to words like I hate you, when the water froze, it looks like mold. I mean, it's so, the contrast is extraordinary. What this showed us visually in real terms is that there is a response, an energetic response to the resonance of something, good, bad, indifferent, and that water is immediately responsive. It's a vehicle for this energetic exchange. It can visibly show us what is going on. Now, you are 75% water or thereabouts, as am I. When you're born, you're around 90% water, and that will eventually diminish. But for the best part of your adult life, you are approximately 75% water. We know that we are all energy manifested into form, energy resonating at different frequencies. We know that you and I, and most of us, are around 75% water. That's the energy manifested into form, is water. We know that water is constantly responding to the environment around us, including thoughts, words, emotions. We also know that the moon has an impact on the water on this planet. Most of us will associate the moon with the tides. Twice every month we get a much bigger tide. Every day the tides come in and out and in and out, twice a day. and twice a month we get a much bigger tide, we get a much bigger swell. We call them the spring tides. These tides happen when the moon is full and when the moon is new. Now we mark these tides through the positioning of the moon, but it is actually the magnetic pull of both the sun and the moon. It's the relationship between the two of them that creates this magnetic pull. But from our perspective here on Earth, the easiest way for us to mark when this is going to happen is by looking at the moon, because visually we can see when she's full, we can see when she's new. And astronomers and astrologers have been charting the positioning and the planetary alignments and movements, including the moon, for thousands and thousands of years. Before I dive into the influence or energetic influence of other planets and the art and science of astrology, I'm going to use those words very thoughtfully, the art and science of astrology and the impact of that in connection to the moon, I first actually want to give you some very, very tangible, real experiences that I'm aware of and that other people have shared with me about the impact of the moon. So my very first experience of being told that the moon has a tangible effect on us as human beings on this planet was actually a driving instructor. I was 17 years old and I was wanting to learn to drive, and a driving instructor told me that he never ever booked a first lesson at around the time of the full moon. He said, people are crazy, there are more accidents, everything's all over the place. I would not want to put a brand new driver in that position of vulnerability. And besides, I don't know what the brand new driver is going to be like. They might be affected badly as well. So that was my very first experience. Now, I'm guessing you guys probably can share many of your own. Please feel free to do so. You're welcome to share your experiences in the comments. But this is a really interesting add-on that I want to say, this is a little piece of statistical information that is very, very recent and connected to this channel. If you make a comment and it doesn't show up straight away, there is a reason for this. Because there are so many scammers, there's so much polarity going on in the world, so much challenge, and there are so many scammers out there, people trying to push themselves onto people, inappropriately, after money, all sorts of stuff. So we have now my colleague and myself have set something up on this channel, which means that every comment that you make is automatically held back for review. And that means that as a community here, we are protected. We can protect you. Curiously enough, we get more inappropriate comments, more scammers, more people trying to push for money, various people pretending to be me, all sorts of stuff. We get way more around the time of the full moon. I think that's absolutely fascinating. So a little piece of current statistical information going on here. Now, other examples that I can give you, aside from my own, but I'll speak about those in a moment. Another example I can give you, I was told by a paramedic that the full moon is a time when they're very, very conscious of heightened issues going on. More call-outs, and often more call-outs that relate to people struggling emotionally. People struggling with overwhelm, struggling with psychological challenges. So a very distinct connection again to the mind and our emotions as well. Another example I can give you is I have various friends who who do bar work, and they and the bouncers on the door have told me they always schedule more staff at around the time of the full moon, because throw alcohol into the mix, and if anything is going to kick off or flare up, that's when it's going to happen. So they're very conscious of this. They schedule, they don't not open, they don't decide not to continue with life, but they accommodate the potential for difficulty. They're aware of it, and their awareness puts them into a position of far greater empowerment. Now, what these examples are showing us is that direct connection between the pull of water, the impact of water, and the potential for our emotions and our state of mind, particularly, to be affected. Now, I would invite you to consider using a diary and a journal, I guess if you're watching this video, it's something that is of interest to you, to really consider using them. In that we're going to dive straight in and do some proper hands-on stuff in a moment, to really take this into account and give yourself a really good trial period. Now, there are many people in the world, this leads me very nicely into astrology, the art and science of astrology. There are many astrologers out in the world who have been really monitoring, studying the different impact of, you could say, the energetic influence of other planets. Astrology has been studied for thousands of years, and I know that there is still skepticism in some quarters about astrology. For the most of you that are watching this kind of video, you're probably fairly open to this. You may even have very positive experiences, as do I. But it is very interesting. I have to say, I find when I talk to people who are very skeptical, as a general rule, they've never tried it. They haven't followed it through. It's just perhaps a fear or a concern. It's something that's unknown to them. But you only have to listen to some of the really outstanding podcasts of current astrologers and read some of the books they are writing. They have really gone to great lengths to monitor the influence and create direct reference points to people's real experiences in order to back up the knowledge and awareness that's been gathered over thousands of years. Different planets are attributed with different energetic influences. Just as we know there is an incoming energetic impact from the sun and the moon, as the moon passes those planets, what I have experienced, this is my own real experiences, as the moon passes those planets, she will add her energy to the energetic incoming influence of that sort of planetary alignment, or that planetary, I don't know, personality is a way of saying it. I have also noticed for myself that as the moon passes through the zodiac signs, that's from our perspective, just as astrologers have for thousands of years perceived the astrological zodiac signs as having a certain flavour or a certain influence, a personality is a good way of thinking about it. When the moon passes through that zodiac sign, she energetically, her magnetic pull, her incoming energy to us here on Earth and to the water on this planet, is influenced by the flavour, the personality of that sign. My experience of following the moon is that this has a very direct reference point to me. I recognise that I am one of those particularly sensitive people. I've always been very sensitive to energy. Some people call it a gift. In other ways, it can be a bit of a curse, because if you're very sensitive to energy, you pick up on everything all of the time. And as a counsellor, a psychotherapist, I have always said to people, if you are very sensitive, you're going to need to learn the skills to utilise your sensitivity. Because if you are very sensitive, you will find you are often also very vulnerable. But that vulnerability can also be an incredible asset and a strength. We are all different, we're all made up in different ways. If you are very sensitive, it is highly likely that you will find using a moon diary and a journal very useful in terms of your own personal awareness and your own personal empowerment. So now we've got these different components, these different pieces of information, these little bits of science, all of which have relevance to using a moon diary or a moon journal or an astrology diary, any of these tools. Let's get a bit hands-on. So there's a couple of things that I just need to voice before we get diary pages out. Firstly, I've created a massive PDF file. In that file, there are diary pages that you can print out and journal pages that you can print out. So while we're doing this webinar, you can literally doodle, scribble, make notes, and actually have those physical pages right in front of you. So if you need to, you can always press the pause button, grab a coffee, get a pen and paper, and whatever you need, but download potentially those pages, print out those specific pages so that you can actually kind of just get really hands-on while we do this, because we're going to be looking at the different components, the different pieces of information that we can use that are connected to the moon and her movement around this planet, and therefore the energetic influence of her energy as she moves around. And we're going to look at how we can access that information and use it as a reference point to listen to our own experiences and use it as a navigational tool. So press the pause button if you need to, access the PDF. The link is literally at the very top of the information box, and I've put it in the comments for phone users as well. It will take you to a page where you can register and then access the PDF straight away. So if you need to, press the pause button, and if you've already got it, if you're on any of my email lists, I'll already have sent it out to you. In just a second, we will literally move into the hands-on part of this webinar. So Super Souls, we are now going to get into the part of the webinar where we get very, very hands-on. Now, you'll see in front of you a slide that shows you the different components of moon energy or moon influence that we're actually going to look at. We're going to look at the phase of the moon, the zodiac sign that the moon is passing through, and void of course periods. I'll explain in a moment what a void of course period is. We're also then going to look at the energy and influence of the other planetary bodies, and then what I call the soul growth layer, where we connect with some of the tribal traditions. I've called it the wisdom of the ancestors. When I really started to learn and read into the understanding of tribal peoples, particularly Native Americans, it is so in alignment with natural ways of living, with living in ways that are attuned to the natural rhythms and cycles of the earth, and ways of living respectfully. Very, very different philosophy and a very different way of being, which I think is actually very much needed now. Because these peoples have been so oppressed, actually, interestingly enough, their stories have been passed down through generations by word of mouth and have remained, I would say, undiluted by Western culture. And there is a big revival, a lot of interest in this kind of work, this kind of knowledge, and I think it's very much needed. So I will dive into some of that as well. Now, before we move into the phases of the moon, let me just shift the camera down for a moment. I just want to show you just a couple of books here. So this little pile of books is just, these are just a few of the many books that are out there that will give you the information and the kind of what I would call, from our Western perspective, the experiments that actually back up everything that I have been talking about at the beginning of this webinar. You can see when I pick up a book and I get really excited about it. You can see by the number of post-its that are in there. I think, oh, I might want to come back to that. I want to come back to that. These books are extraordinary. What I've done is I have written a list of the books that I have found most helpful and most interesting, and I've put them at the end of the PDF. So if there's anything you want to read up on or connect to, I think I've put a podcast in there, a particularly good astrological podcast as well. You can access those, and it will just give you the information rather than me waffling away any further about the science and raving about it. You can access this kind of information for yourself. So let's get back to our layers. Now, in just a moment, we will dive straight into that PDF and we'll go through some real hands-on pages. But I just want to talk you through these different components in terms of what you will find in different diaries and journals and the presentation of this information. The phase of the moon, almost any astrological or moon or lunar diary will give you the phase of the moon on a daily basis, and also the zodiac sign that the moon is passing through. Some will give you void of course periods, others won't. I'll talk to you about those in a moment. Some will also give you information about the energy and the influence of the other planetary bodies, but some will not. It really depends on how much information you feel you want to have at your fingertips and how that information is presented. The soul growth layer is really a different ball game altogether. The soul growth layer is, for me, why I created the Astro-Moon journal, because it's a whole other layer of emotional and psychological deep diving that was such a revelation to me. I simply couldn't put everything into a diary. There's just no way I could squeeze all that information in. So that's a kind of a different layer of information. But let's first of all look at these top 3 layers. So I think the very best way to look at this is to actually look at a diary. Now we've got 2 pages here from my own diary, and these are part of your PDF. At the front of your PDF, you will find there is a contents page that tells you everything that I've included in this handout. So I hope that will be useful, and you'll be able to find information and come back to it as you need it. Now, when I have listed the art of manifestation, the phases of manifestation, and the phases of the moon, then I've given you information about the moon and the zodiac signs. The reason I'm using this language is because scientists are telling us that we are far more active in creating the world that we live in than we realise. You know, there's a ton of stuff out in the world about the law of attraction, and I can say as a therapist that I'm very conscious that we are often, our thinking patterns, our emotions are often on autopilot. If we think of the word manifest as simply being a way of describing the fact that we are creating more consciously, I think that's perhaps the best way to think about manifestation. You know, we are creating, we are creators. We're creating all the time. We're thinking, we're feeling, we're doing, we're acting. Everything that we do has a potential effect. You know, when you walk out of your door, you turn left rather than right. That affects the consequences that move on then from your life. So even in a really simple way, that is in essence an act of creation. It's changing the direction of something. When we think about manifestation, what we are actually doing is we are trying to become very conscious of how we are creating and of what we are creating. And this is one of the many areas where aligning with the energy of the moon, the incoming energy, the flow of the moon, can be very, very helpful if you understand how that energy is impacting and affecting and indeed supporting you. So we have the contents here. So I've actually written in the diary, and I've given you these pages as part of the handout. I've actually compared the phases of manifestation with the phases of the moon, because they really do align perfectly. Now there's again a ton of stuff out there, some brilliant astrologers who for many years have been researching the phases of the moon. We tend to think about manifestation in association with the new moon and the full moon. We often look at these sort of pivotal moments where that magnetic pull of the moon is at its greatest strength. But the reality is, we don't just manifest twice a month, you know, where we have a little moment of focused thought. We're in the process of manifesting all the time. We're creating all of the time. There are certain phases in our world when we are going to feel more motivated, other times when we are less motivated. Sometimes we'll be more reflective, other times we'll be in a much more get-go kind of mood. What you'll find as you start to learn about the phases of the moon is that there are certain times of the moon phases that really actively support you in either moving outwardly and you know, onwards and upwards and outwards, and other times when you naturally feel as though you kind of want to slow down, you need to rest up, you need to reflect, and that energy affects you in a very different way. In our goal-driven Western culture, we tend to associate productivity, success as being on the get-go all the time. You know, we work out our goals, we go from A to B, and we get there as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Well, I don't think that's actually for me anyway, a particularly natural way of living. We often burn out if we're really actively working and operating on that level all of the time. The phases of the moon and learning how they affect you will help you to, or certainly this is my experience, to navigate the I would call the healthy requirements of a healthy, balanced human life often come more into balance when you understand these phases of the moon and how they affect you. They kind of support you. Sometimes, you know how sometimes the universe just, you feel like the universe is just closing every door for you. It's like every light is red. Well, actually, maybe you're meant to slow down, and we need to listen to that. As you learn to listen to the phases of the moon, you will often find that you start to become much more naturally in tune with yourself, actually, and that you yourself become more aligned with the natural world and the energy of the natural world. That for me is one of the major amazing things of learning to listen to the moon and work with the moon. But the phases of the moon do correlate beautifully. They're like a mirror of the phases of manifestation if you break down that process. So I've included that in your handout, so you do have information about the phases of the moon in there, and indeed about the art of manifestation and what that is kind of about, and information about the moon and the zodiac signs. So I've also as well, actually, in fact, let's just pause and speak about that too. The moon in the zodiac signs and the void of course moon. Now, the best way to talk about this is to look at our hands-on diary pages. So this is literally the very first week of January 2023. On Monday the 2nd, the moon is in Taurus. Now we can see that the moon, by these little moons, is getting bigger. So when the moon is new, we really can't see her at all. She's shrouded by the light of the sun. The sun and the moon are sitting together, and this is a time that's associated with new beginnings. She then moves into her waxing crescent phase, and she starts to get bigger. She then reaches her first quarter, which is often a time of evaluation, and she then gets bigger and bigger, which is what we're seeing here, until she reaches the full moon. Now you can see in this diary that I have the full moon 16 degrees 21 in Cancer on both the 6th and the 7th of January. The reason the moon is on the 6th and the 7th is because depending on where you are in the world, that is when the moon reaches her peak of fullness. I will show you how that is listed as well elsewhere. But what we're seeing is, and this will be in every moon diary you use, you will see at some point that the phase of the moon will be shown to you. And you will also see, this is the second thing, that top layer, we have the phase of the moon. The second layer, the zodiac sign, is the sign that the moon is in. Some diaries will also give you information about whether the moon is in a void of course period. My diary does. It's got VOC. So Monday the 2nd, the moon begins the day in Taurus. She moves into a void of course period, remains in the void of course period until the following day, when she then enters Gemini. What this actually means is a void of course is the space between the zodiac signs. As the moon moves from our perspective on Earth from one sign to another, she doesn't necessarily move literally from one sign bang into the next. There's very often a space in between. Now this space of in-betweenness is very interesting, because the energy of the moon is no longer being channeled through the influence or personality of a particular sign. And I have noticed that this can affect us in very, very different ways. Now, I'll use myself as an example. I think this is the best way to describe it. If things are going very well in my world, and emotionally I'm doing fabulously and I'm really seriously on track, and maybe I'm on a moon phase like here where the moon is getting bigger and bigger, and my motivation is high, my energy levels are high, the stuff that I'm doing creatively is gathering momentum. The moon in Taurus for me is often a time when I can really ground my creativity and make things happen in a very earthy kind of way. So I might be actively very creative at this point. The energy of the moon is supporting movement forwards. When the moon enters a void of course space, I can feel very liberated. It's almost as though I'm not held back by any particular resonance or energy. But if there's stuff going on in my world that is actually maybe more emotionally challenging, then the void of course period could actually leave me feeling a little bit more unanchored or out at sea. So knowing when the void of course periods happen is quite helpful. It's also helpful to know if there's a particularly long void of course period. Now, it's impossible in a diary to give you that depth of information because the diary needs to apply to you wherever you are in the world. But what I do every month on social media is that I always post a moon update, which tells you about any specifically long periods where the moon is in a void of course period for hours and hours. Sometimes it's very brief, it's less than an hour, but at other times, if it's something like 8 or 9 hours, that's a long period of time if you've got stuff going on and you're feeling a bit unanchored, or if when the moon is in a particular sign, you have learned and recognized that when the moon goes through that sign, you are maybe feeling a little bit more sensitive or a little bit more, just a little bit more emotional. However the moon affects you in different signs, this is the purpose of the diary. So firstly, you're going to be able to see exactly the moon phase, and you'll be able to make notes as to how that moon phase affects you. In my diary, there's literally room for making notes. The reason I've left this here is really so that you can literally make notes in a very personal way. For me, Taurus is very productive. This is a moon phase that's very productive. Interestingly enough, for me, when the moon moves into Gemini, the way that that influences me is that I often find my communication kind of ups its game. I'm able to see things from more than one perspective. So I know that when the moon is in Gemini, if there are any areas of my world or my creativity, my creative process, let's say I'm working on something like a wonderful moon diary, if I'm needing to sort of balance things out, work out how best to approach something, and I need to see it from all directions, when the moon is in Gemini, that's actually very helpful for me. I can really weigh things up. I can come in from all different perspectives. So with the moon moving into a full period after gaining traction in Taurus, Gemini will help me to evaluate along the way, to tweak, to course correct. That's how the energy of Gemini affects me. How do I know that? Because I've been listening and I've been making notes. Now, it may affect you differently. When the moon is in Gemini, I always think when you're keeping a moon diary or a moon journal, make notes. If you find you're having a very emotional day, make a note. Having an emotional day. If you find yourself feeling conflicted, you can see something from more than one side of you can see something from more than one perspective, but you're struggling with procrastination. You can't quite make up your mind which way to go. You might write this down: procrastinating today. Excuse my spelling, procrastinating today. And you might put moon in Gemini, however that is for you. You're making notes. You might find when the moon is in a particular phase that you find yourself prolifically dreaming. So again, you might put, we know that the moon is in her waxing gibbous phase here. This is her getting bigger and bigger, and there are waxing gibbous moon phase ends here. In this diary, it tells you when that phase begins and when that moon phase ends, but we can physically see it as well. Waxing gibbous, I might put dreaming prolifically. If we make notes, again, signs, synchronicities, there's purpose to this because we're gathering information about how the moon is seemingly potentially affecting us. We may not at this point in time have a reference point, but the more notes you make, the more you will find that there are consistencies in the way that the energy impacts and affects you. And this will be to do with the sign that the moon is in, and also the phase that the moon is in. So pretty much every moon diary is going to give you those two pieces of information. Some diaries will also give you information about the void of course period, and other diaries will also give you information about the other planetary the impact of the other planetary alignments in conjunction with the moon as well. If you have an astrology diary, you might find that rather than it being written as Taurus, for example, or Gemini Cancer, you might actually find that there are just symbols and signs. A lot of astrological diaries give you a lot of detailed information about the planets, but it will all be in little signs. So for example, I'd have to look this up, but you know, here we have Wednesday, we know the moon is in Gemini, but rather than actually written in Gemini, you might just get a sign. You might actually also find, let's say if the moon was conjunct Mercury, you'll find a little list of symbols in every day. Lots of astrological diaries give you that extra information, but they give it to you using symbols for each day. Now, let's move on and show you some more diary pages. So in the diary that I created, and again, this is the balance of stuff that I have done for me. This is what I felt I needed. I found that some of the moon diaries didn't give me enough information, and the astrological diaries almost gave me too much. It was sort of a bit of an overload on a daily basis. So what I've done in this particular diary, I'm just actually going to skip through a couple of pages. Here we go. What I've actually done in this diary is, first of all, I give you basically it's like a welcome to January page. So there's an overview of the kind of flow of energy. This is just me. I like to look at the flow of the lunar energy. And so I've given an overview that tells you what's kind of happening in the coming month. Also in my diary, because I read cards and I read runes, I have actually also included some pages with cards and runes that I draw for every month of the year. This is not everybody's bag. You're not going to get this in the majority of astrological diaries. This is something that's personal to me because it's the stuff that I love and the stuff that I do. But these are, I have to say, these have been fascinating. I've included them in the diary, I think pretty much from day one, all those years ago when we first started the diary and the journal. And yeah, they are remarkably, I have to say, for me, they've been remarkably accurate. But so I give an overview. You'll also find most astrological diaries will give you an overview. And indeed, many of the moon diaries will give you an overview, and there will be an emphasis on the new and the full moons. So check out, when you look inside pages, check out the look inside pages, because you'll be able to see the layout. You'll be able to see how the information is presented, and you'll be able to see also how much information is given to you. Most astrological diaries will give you, and earth diaries will give you an overview. Now, what I've also included in my diary is not just an overview, but an overview of the moon phases. So in January, we can see that we begin January in the waxing gibbous moon, which runs from December the 31st to January the 5th, and we can see which signs she passes through. I've actually spoken then about the impact of the potential astrological collaborations, and I've spoken about it in terms of the inflow of energy, because for me that's what I want to see. It's what I want to know about. I want to be able to check in on a daily basis and see where the moon is, what sign is she in, but also what to kind of expect in terms of the incoming energy. Listings for the full moon, I've actually listed exact timings right across the globe, and this is in response to you guys' feedback from you all. Last year, I think, well, 2022, we only included a couple of locations in the States. We included Auckland and Sydney as well, and the UK. This year we have got tons of different locations across the globe. So wherever you are, you should be able to work out the exact timings of both the full moon and the new moon, because they are particularly pivotal in harnessing that energy for manifestation. And you know, there's a lot of information in the front of the diary about that, and it's in the PDF handout as well, so you've got that there for you. These moon phases do give you literally information about the flow of energy. If you're using an astrological diary, what you'll probably find is that there'll be an overview, and the information will be there for you on a daily basis, but it will be there using symbols and signs rather than just an overview of the energy. For me, I wanted an overview of the energy, and I wanted to touch base without having to go online, look at astrological sites and kind of interpret that information. So that's what we've actually done in my particular journal and diary. So, oops, that's your page there. So I hope this gives you a bit of information about how a diary is working. So just to sort of hold that information, recap that information. Ultimately, with a moon diary or journal, the fundamental use of it as a tool is for you to learn to listen to how the lunar energy affects you in a personal way. By building up a record, you will be able to use that energy, you'll be able to utilize it to navigate from a position of much greater awareness. I have worked with this diary now this is the 4th year, the 2023 is the 4th year of my own diary, and several people I know who are using it literally do use it as a kind of an energy roadmap. You could look up your chart if you wish to. Some of you will have a lot more astrological knowledge and information, and you may well know if the moon passes through Cancer, for example, or there's a full moon in Cancer, that it affects you in a particular way. I hope that this diary will give you the information not just to use the full moon and the new moon, because we're not only creating at those pivotal times, we're actually in an ongoing process of creation all the time. And the periods in between, when the moon is in her waxing crescent, her waxing gibbous, her waning gibbous and her waning crescent, these are periods of what I would call consistent activity in manifestation, in creativity, in living our daily lives, cracking on with it, getting on with it. And I hope by focusing in on those moon phases too, as well as the new and the full moons, which is where we always get that emphasis in most moon diaries, I hope it gives you a bit more information so that you can really become much sharper in how you use the lunar energy, and in understanding literally when to push forwards, when to ease back, when to reflect, when to review, when to evaluate, when to look after yourself, when to stop altogether. Learning how the moon is influencing you both in the moon phase and in the moon sign, I hope will be helpful, and with the added information about the energy of the planets, again, I hope that the collaboration of all of this information will really assist you in navigating the year ahead. So Super Souls, I hope that gives you an idea of how to use a diary. You've got in the PDF hands-on pages, so you can literally play with it. You can use it, you don't have to rush out and buy a diary, they're always available to buy. You can literally play with it, use it for the first month of the year and just see how you get on, before you make decisions about, going out and accessing these in an ongoing way. So I hope this is helpful to you. I'm now going to move to the journal, and I'm going to talk about another layer of potential information that you can use in using a moon diary or journal. The journal has a different layer of information. Some of the astrological diaries and journals that you access will also have similar information. So it's worth, I think, checking in on this to see how that kind of deeper layer of information can be accessed to support your ongoing navigation of life, and ultimately of learning to listen to you. So let's now look at what I call the soul growth layer, the tribal traditions, the wisdom of the ancestors, the tree lore, the Celtic information. And let me talk to you a little bit about this. So let's come back to our PDF handout and the second part of this, which draws on information from the Astro-Moon journal. So the first part of this journal, and I've included it again in the PDF for you, tells you, we've delved into the information about science is telling us what we're thinking and feeling right here and right now is creating. And I've just talked a little bit about the moon and your spiritual journey, how these things interconnect. Now, my own journey of lunar investigations took me into learning about tribal ways and the Celtic tree lore, and I was absolutely stunned on 2 counts. Firstly, because I found that the stuff, the stories and the information that was showing up every month with the tribal moon phases and the Celtic tree lore was resonating with my actual life circumstances at a level of kind of psychological and emotional kind of soul growth. So that was absolutely mind-blowing to see that. I was also stunned to realise how much they aligned with the actual astrology of the new and the full moons of that period. So I then ended up writing this second book. Now, what this second book actually does, again, this is here, we've got a how to use the journal. Part of it. I've also given information about the earth festivals, because this is just part of those Celtic and tribal, part of the Celtic and tribal information. But the journal is very, very different. Rather than giving you daily information about the moon phase and the sign that the moon is in, those top layers of information to understand how the energy is affecting you and to keep a record of it, we move into a very different layer of information here, because in these, there are actually 13 moons, 13 tribal moons, 13 Celtic moons. We don't always get 13 moons in a year, but sometimes we do. 2022, we had 13 moons. Each moon phase starts with a new moon. 2022 has had 13 moon phases, which means the 13th is actually overflowing into 2023. So what I've actually done in the journal is I've written a page that tells you about the tribal lore and the tree lore, and the stories, the influence and the sort of psychological and emotional layer of growth that connects to that particular moon phase. What I've also then done is given key dates. And there's also a crystal, much as in the diary we've actually used some cards and some runes. In the journal I've used a crystal. This is just stuff that I'm passionate about, so I've included it, a crystal that aligns with this particular moon phase. The 13th moon phase of 2022 is governed by the tree lore of Elder, and the 13th moon becomes her vision. It's just so interesting to learn about these traditions, because they really do, for me anyway, they have helped me to anchor myself in the learning and the growth from any situation that is taking place in my world. And it has been absolutely mind-blowing for me to realize that the stuff that shows up in my life correlates exactly with the life lessons that come through these monthly moon phases, these monthly, I call them monthly moon tutorials, because that's really what it feels like for me. The information is there in your handout, so you can read it all anyway for this moon phase. And in fact, I've included the first couple of moon phases, so you can really get a flavour of what this is about. I've included dates. Now, the dates that I've focused on, because it's a journal rather than a diary, I've focused on the new moon, the quarter moons and the full moon. And my reason for doing this is because these are those pivotal, more focused points in the moon cycle. I was saying a moment ago when we were looking at the diary that we should never underestimate the impact of the moon phases when we're just cracking on and doing it. We're getting on with life, we're getting on with manifesting, we're doing things, we're working at life. We should never underestimate the impact of those phases. But the new moon, the quarter moons and the full moons are pivotal points of focus. And if we are wanting to actively, consciously create, or actively, consciously live and actively, consciously grow from any of our experiences, then having natural focus points where we press the pause button and we are evaluating in a specific way depending on the moon sign at that moon phase they are really, really helpful moments when we put on the brakes, we evaluate, and we get clear about what we're doing next. So in the journal, I've placed a much greater emphasis on those 4 points of the lunar month: the new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, the last quarter, and then of course we reach the next new moon. So the way that I've laid out the journal is I've given a lot more information about the actual full moon and the new moons. So as we're moving into January, you can see on this page, we have the full moon, January the 6th and the 7th. We've got dates across the world. And I've also talked about what a Cancer full moon is traditionally thought of, what the influence is about for us, in order to hopefully give you an anchor point to sort of reference your own feelings and your own experiences. I've also spoken about using moon water as well. That's something that I have been doing for some years now. I place spring water outside at the time of a full moon, and the water really is very much energized. It's very interesting. When I bottle it afterwards, I actually keep a little astrological chart of the dynamics of the day. And then if I'm using that full moon water in ceremony, I actually literally use it as well, a bit like homeopathy, where and like Bach flower remedies, where you use just a few drops. For example, I mean, a Cancer full moon is beautifully nurturing. In fact, I will read you a tiny bit. In astrology, Cancer is ruled by our beautiful moon, and so the influence of a full moon in Cancer is all about the ebb and flow of emotions and the feminine qualities of sensitivity, vulnerability, intuition, healing and nurture. So if we've had a particularly favourable, very nurturing full moon in Cancer, and I've put water out to absorb the energy, and we know from those wonderful scientific experiments that water is massively responsive to energy. So by putting water out, I always use spring water or rainwater. I don't use tap water, or if I have to use tap water, I will leave it out to acclimatise for a few days before we use it. But I leave it out to absorb the energy of the full moon. And, you know, I might use, if I'm having a salt bath, for example, and I'm, you know, feeling particularly tired and I could really do with some self-care and some nurture, a couple of drops of moon water will go into my bath from that Cancer full moon. So I literally keep a little picture of the chart of the day next to that, you know, goes onto a label on the jar of the water that I keep from those full moons. There are many, many uses for full moon water, but, you know, that's a whole other video really. But anyway, I've written a bit about it, the kind of ceremonies you might want to use that water for. So this is, let's come back to the journal and the way that it's laid out. So I've given greater amount of information about the full moons and the new moons with timings across the globe. There's a page for your full moon illuminations and insights. So in terms of journaling, there's opportunity to really, you know, these pages come side by side so that you can make notes and just generally again, reference what's happening to you. Are you dreaming? What's going on in your world? What kind of signs and synchronicities are showing up? Are you tired? Are you overwhelmed? Are you feeling very, very loved and cared for? Making notes is a really helpful way of learning more about these pivotal moments. This is literally the end of December into the beginning of January. The journal is laid out starting with a new moon to a new moon, because those are the moon phases that we look at when we're looking at the tree law and the tribal and the tribal information. So it's not like it's not worked out on a calendar month, it's worked out on a moon month. So the 13th moon phase of 2022 moving into 2023 actually completes, and we move into our desires and goals for the coming moon month, completes when we then get to the first moon phase of 2023, which begins with the new moon in January. So the first moon phase of 2023, which moves, this moon phase moves from January into February. The first moon phase is governed by the tree law of Birch, which is all about new beginnings, and also talks with relations. This is the Native American tribal moon. And so I've written about this, and I've talked about another crystal. I've given you the dates. I've also put in the Earth festivals. So we have an overview, not of the calendar month, but of the moon month. Okay, and that is the fundamental difference. You're going to get a lot more information, more detailed information about the full moon, the new moon, the actual timings, the underlying soul growth layer that comes from the Celtic tree lore, from the tribal moons. And we are working with moon cycles rather than calendar months. And that is the massive difference between the journal and the diary. The diary will give you that daily information, those top layers of the moon phase, the moon sign, the void of course information, planetary information that's happening within those moon phases. The journal gives you a different layer of information and space to write and journal at much greater depth, focusing on those 4 pivotal turning points, those almost stationary points of shift in the lunar energy. The information that is given will be unique to each journal. If you're using an astrology journal and a lunar journal, check out the pages inside because they're going to vary considerably. This is a deeper layer of looking at things. With the diaries, whether it is a moon diary or an earth diary or an astrology diary, those fundamental top layers of information will be the same. And you're going to get that information regardless. It's just a question of how much information is given to you, how it's presented. Journals are very different. They tend to be much more personal, and they are really actively looking at giving you either a lot more information or sometimes a lot less information. They just are a journal that is there for you to journal in the same way that you would with any other book that you buy to write in. So check out the details of any books that you wish to buy. I hope that I have been able to give you, a good overview of the kinds of layers that you can actually use when you are working with the moon, understanding how the lunar energy affects you, and I hope that this has been helpful to you. Super Souls, thank you so much for joining me for this webinar. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you have got enough information to be able to navigate the coming year to the max in terms of your awareness. And I hope that you also have enough awareness to go out and find the right book, the right tools for you. A huge thank you to those of you who have been supporting my work ongoing and who have supported my diary and my journal. This is the 4th year. 2023 is the 4th year of their existence, and every year I've listened to feedback. I've worked with them myself and really fine-tuned the information and the way that that information is delivered. I'm really pleased with what we've got this coming year. I think, I would like to think that we've really got the exact kind of formula right, but I am totally open to feedback. So do please, again, in the comments, if you're using them, and in the ongoing monthly updates that I do on YouTube, do let me know. If you'd like to get notification of those monthly updates, or indeed any of the other stuff that I post on a regular basis, if you subscribe and press the little bell icon, things should come into your stream. So yeah, just thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for those of you who've been giving back through the super thanks in the comments, and thank you to all of you who support my ongoing work, including my big library, my free library through Patreon. All of you, please have the most amazing 2023. There is no question that we are living in extraordinary times of what feels like very accelerated, a period of accelerated growth for humanity. And my hat goes off to all of you with the hugest respect, because I think using tools like this enable us to walk a far more conscious pathway, and everything that we do has an impact on the whole. So what we do that is good and right for us in a really positive way is going to also have a massively positive impact and radiate out into the world beyond us. So enough said. Thank you. Tons of love. Have an amazing 2023.